All right, Tim. So why don't you tell me what you're using SoundMiner and Radium to do and make, and like what kind of sounds are you coming up with? Like any example sounds that you got?
I'll do all that. And I just wanted to say that since this came out, I've been using it every day on every project, just because I can, because it reminds me of the old days using the Synclav. And I just can't get enough. I tell you, one of the things I was going to do as a simple thing would be to show, because I showed some people at work, trying to get them to understand how awesome this is. And here's a nice little thunder from, I think, Thomas Rex Beverly, right?
Yeah, it looks like his artwork in the corner there.
Right, there you go. So so there's that, and it's beautiful and clean like what he does. But then if you want to go to Hollywood, then you want to, all of a sudden, I should have played the original first. Here's the original, right?
Yeah,
it's beautiful. But it, if you want stuff to be amped up, you can just play it on your keyboard. I'm playing high and low. I forgot to put my
release up a little bit.
Little release going on there, but if we want to get dangerous, then we can do a little of that. We can do a little of that. And all of a sudden, now we're taking off into space or something. But that's a simple way to take one sound and kind of spin it out into many variations. And this is the very simplest use. I'm not doing any crazy modulation. I'm not doing any, I'm not even doing any plugins in the rack.
Yeah, it's literally just taking that single sound and playing it at different pitches. So you've got the highs, you've got the lows, and then just a little bit of limiting just to kind of keep it under control.
And just to pump it up a little bit, and then as another example, this is a little, I was playing around with Paul Stretch years ago, and I coughed while I was doing it, and I stretched out all the stuff I was recording. Hopefully we're going to hear this. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Anyways, so this is processed, stretched out cough with some verb on it. Right. So it's cool already.
Very cool.
But let's say we want to make an ambience out of it, right? So we just... Now we're in Ghost Town.
That's creepy. Yeah. I'm getting a little bit of chills up the back of my neck.
What, up north? You get cold up there? Come on.
Very cold.
So the thing that I love about using a sampler for sound design is that you can take a kernel and spin it out into something longer or more varied or more interesting. Very simply, we took that realistic thunder and then, made a Hollywood style, lightning strike out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And just out of a simple thing like you could take a simple wind. Oh, I got this great wind, but it's only 5 seconds or 10 seconds. Well, then just loop it up, play different pitches, get your in and out going, and then you can just, and things like wind. This is not a good example, but things like wind.
It sounds great.
And water and fire and earth, all the elements, metal. One of the things that intrigues me about those kinds of sounds is that when you pitch them down, they still sound like the same material or the same element, but they're just at a different pitch,
Mm-hmm. This really interests me because a lot of the examples that I've seen and my own experiences with using samplers is really layering a lot of like percussive like impacts and gunshots and those kind of things. So seeing this where it's more of a constant sound and being able to use that single sound to build out like an ambience or a layer, that's super cool. Something I'm not used to seeing.
One of my favorite keywords is, let me see, this is unrehearsed. So let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Is vortex. Because there's always movies that have big, giant, swirling whatever.
Mhm.
And so, for example, this is something I built for this magical thing, whatever. Not a great sound, but it had a vocal growly texture. And I'm sure I had a whole bunch of things, and it sounds like it's got chopper on it, maybe. I should be sorting it this way. Anyways, by having a whole bunch of layers that are going to be triggered randomly, and then you can add GRM, in the rack afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what here we go. Something like this, made from a lot of different layers that are just sort of feeding in and out of each other.
Could you? Is there any chance you could recall that and have a quick little peek?
Well, let's do that.
What you did there?
Then let's do that too. I'm always so happy when these buttons appear, and there's so many of my sounds that they don't.
Right, because of the post mastering.
Yeah. Early on, I would take it all into RX first,
right?
And then and fix it, and then I didn't realize that I was getting rid of that stuff, or you name it in Pro Tools, and that goes away too. So all of those things really disappoint me. But I've got a sound that I used recently, and I went to, okay, what did I make that out of? And it's gone, and now I have to figure out
how it happens.
How I made it, because I need to have more variation now.
But that's a good little aside as you bring it up. So as you make the sound, you do the recording, you do the performance. What is sort of your workflow after that point? As far as do you do any sort of normalization? Do you bring it into RX and do those kind of things?
I'm afraid to do RX now, because I don't want to lose this. But normally, yes. I go into RX only and often to, remove noise, or specifically if there's like a ringing or a little clicking thing that I don't want that was in one of the samples, I do the repair sort of thing in RX. You mentioned those questions that you had in
the Facebook group.
Yeah. And I was going to kind of address that, but I feel like I don't master my recordings, so to speak, but I will always, send them through the rack and jack them up, if what I'm looking for is, something to be more aggressive. So there's usually the, whatever pre-processing I'll do in here, and then there's the kind of, fattening or EQ or adding a Doppler or adding a phaser, flanger, whatever. So there's always the second half in the rack. I think we even talked about maybe having a way to save when you save your preset. If it could save,
definitely,
save the DSP rack too.
Because ultimately, I want the DSP rack to be separate. So you have a playback rack, and then you have a dedicated radium rack.
Yeah,
and that would always get saved, and it would work exactly the same. But
now, why would they have to be separate?
Because one of the biggest complaints that people have is like, okay, they set up the rack. There's an option to sort of process through the rack as well. That's sort of like a hidden kind of thing. But you could load a sound into Radium already processed. So anyway, even if you don't, you go through and you do your recording. It's getting processed through the rack. As soon as you click record, it loads back into SoundMiner. But now you're going to be listening to it through the rack again. So it's like, now they bypass the rack.
For me, sometimes processing it through the rack twice is actually good. So I will, I'll label it B, and I'll say this one's processed twice, and in the headphones it sounds great, and then later on you're like, I guess I overcooked that one.
Right.
But
double dip.
that is a minor complaint of going back through and
doing a master
doing
bypass.
That. Really, really the smallest of things. So for example, I don't even know. So this is just a little
that's
something.
Really cool. So that's using the time-specific pitch envelope on that one, it sounds like?
I did something like this on a show I did a long time ago. And it was really great for kind of getting me a fake lightning sort of sound. I had a kind of a steady crackle, and I had to go, so I guess I was shooting for that. And look at how short this is. It's only a few seconds long, this little piece.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got movement in it. I got the random pan on it. And so if I just sort of play, I think that's got to be a mistake. Oh, no, it's this guy here. And what is this here? This is an old design. Okay, and that seems like it's got that's got the pitch thing also. Okay, so if I just play one sound.
Oh, it's so cool.
So it starts high and then goes low, right? So it gives it more shape. If I just played it straight, it's less interesting. So anyways, turn that on, turn them all on, run through the rack, make everything loud. So I was looking for something with edges, I guess, that would have some transients. And just play handfuls of notes all over the place.
That does sound so good.
And
how many octaves are you playing right now? It sounds like that was quite wide.
It's actually only across about two octaves. I have a 61 key, so for me, being able to play top and the very bottom is
it was probably the
really
pitch shifting
important.
I was hearing.
Yeah, I think that's what you're hearing.
Yeah, that sounds so good.
Yeah, so that was giving you that. So that's just a very rough example of, the vortexy kind of things where you can have a whole bunch of stuff and then, you run it through other things. And you just come up with a complex sort of thing that you couldn't cut in any reasonable fashion in Pro Tools or whatever. That's the thing about using this and making your variations and coming up with material that you would just not get any other way. Why am I not?
So when you're sitting down at the computer, how much? I mean, obviously you've got a ton of experience. So how much are you able to go? Okay, I'm going to make vortex sounds today. How much of it is like randomization, and if you happen to come up with something else and go down a different path, how often does that sort of happen to you?
Well, I learned early on from Harry Cohen that when you're experimenting and you come across something cool, record it right then and there. Even if it's not going to work for the project you're on, you got to save it because chances are you're not going to go back. You got to follow that rabbit hole where it leads because you'll never recreate where you are. You'll never even in the headspace or physically and that's why all this recall is awesome because it'd be super cool to go back and figure out what I did. But here's, for example, a whole bunch of single flies that I layered with lots of randomization to try to get a kind of a swarm sound. So I knew exactly what I wanted. I have recordings of swarms, but they're all really thick. But I wanted something that had the foreground movement, right? Mm-hmm. So
everything is very wide as well. I see there's a lot of stereo movements.
With this particular, this is before you came up with the random thing. So I was doing my own random, exactly, because the real fly swarms that I have recordings of are fine, but they're thick and they're not a ton of space, left, right. So I wanted some details that would, give me width across. So these are all singles for the most part with crazy randomization on it, right? Mm-hmm. Anyhow, so when you ask the question is, am I getting what I'm after? Absolutely. I have a purpose. I need some lava splats, right? So I loaded up. This one's gone too. Sadness. I loaded up a bunch of things that have the kind of splatty quality that I wanted, and I did some random panning, and I did and then I got exactly what I wanted because it's something that I just never have enough of. They're not all good, but
but they all sound. There's variations in them all.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got a full minute of them there.
oh, dude, I have 3.5 minutes of this. I've got
Yeah.
5 minutes of other things, These are not really that great, but this is what I've been doing. I got almost 5 minutes of. Oh, that's a recording. Never mind. Right. So when you ask about how much am I getting what I want versus experimenting, all of this is experimenting, and I'm trying to find the right performance and random that gives me the thing that I'm after. But by the same token, I'm loading up. It's not like S-Layer or that Boom thing where it's randomly picking stuff out of your library. Mm-hmm. It's targeted because I'm only loading in the slots the type of material that I want. So I'm controlling the randomness to give me things of the flavor that I want. And then I go hog wild and I just record, all this kind of stuff just to see.
So when you're loading material into slots, do you think about what kind of frequency ranges you want? Are you thinking, okay, in slot 2, I'm going to put some low frequency material, and then in slot 3, I'll put some brighter material, or does it matter so much?
Yeah, of course it does, because you're trying to create the composite that has the flavor or the attitude that you're looking for. And one of the things we talked about before was just the way I've been doing it this whole time is when I design stuff, I design in layers rather than full composites. And 20 years in now, I kind of regret that, right. But I cannot change. Right. Because if I had now, or if I had gone back and every time I made a cool explosion, recorded it a stereo composite of that, and what I cut for a show, then I would have a gigantic explosion library, for example. But what I did was I made the layers, the elements that I could then in my mind repurpose, reuse in a different way, and then it would be unique for the next show.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is also for the mixer as well, I suppose, as well, right? So you can deliver different elements.
Oh, yeah, exactly. No, you always deliver split layers and elements for the mixer because you never know, that thing is going to clash with the music that I haven't heard, because it doesn't exist yet or whatever. So you always have to deliver separation. Excuse me. So that's always the way we work. But, I've always been the type to build in the project, in the session, to picture. Needs a little more of this, needs a little more of that. Okay, now I got it. It's good. And there it is. And it exists as all of these elements that have been edited together and mixed and panned and whatever. And what I should have done, young kiddos, is then record that out and say, okay, this is the explosion that I built. So I don't have to rebuild it from scratch next time. But I don't work that way. I always have made layers and elements. So that's why I have all of this stuff, because, a year from now, I might need to make something else and I can have some of this material be useful, and it's not the same because it's, used in a different way. Mm-hmm.
And being able to recall everything as well that you used, you're like, oh, I think I used a splatty wet bloop in the sound. You could pull out just that single element.
If this was still intact, absolutely, I could do that. But in the absence of that, or just in the heat of the moment, I just record a lot of long pieces of source, and then I go and I pick through them. I was going to do this later, but
as you're doing a recording, do you do a mute? So if you've got 5 slots going, so you do a big play, and then you go, okay, I'm just going to solo maybe the first one, because that could be nice as a little sweetener on top. Maybe I want to put that into Atmos or something.
This is why the pause button for me is fantastic. I tell you, in the old days when I was using Contact, what I would do is, let's say this is a source file that I want to perform, right? I would go like this, and I would say, okay, I've got the very first whatever this, I don't even know what it is. Okay, it's a giant pinecone thing from Thomas Rex Beverly that I smashed. Anyways, and I would say, okay, I got all the versions of that I can come up with, and then I would say, okay, and then I go like here, and I go like that, and then I'm going to do all of them with this, right? And then I would work my way down and make all of my versions that way. And that worked. I had long files with usually big gaps where I was changing parameters. But now with this pause button, I'm all the time. I'm like turning that off or changing the level of this or going over to my rack and changing something over there. Okay, now let's start again and record some more and have it all be in the same file. But, so, I have this thing on a random, right? And I've got, this stuff that we used to call GAC when I was a kid. They call it noise putty now. You get it at the museums. So you can see I got my radium regions going. And this, I think I mentioned to you, I went through this. This was a recording that I made here in my bedroom. And I didn't use the automatic feature because it's so noisy and it's so long, but also because here, these are like big farts and squeaks. And that's not what I wanted, right? I wanted the wet stuff. So I chose the pieces that, it took forever to go through and choose the pieces that have the sound that I'm looking for. Let me recall this too. Otherwise it's not going to sound like anything. Okay. I think that's coming through. Okay. So I'm playing just a few notes at a time, right? Super cool, weird, creepy, splatty stuff. And then there's a different take. Oh, and you're talking about high and low. This was, and Jay Jennings inspired me here because he was playing me a creature movement sound that had some growls and some vocals in it. I'm like, oh, gee, I haven't put any vocals in my movement in a while. So I added this here. It's pitched down. It's got all the random stuff, but it just adds a little breathiness to this, which was supposed to be a goopy creature, big, wet, goopy creature movement, right? Yeah. So now I've got all those layers going. Coming in and out, and you get something that you would never build in Pro Tools, by editing. And I can have short things, or I can have a whole long giant monster oozing down the hallway. Whatever you want, So it's so easy. But when you were talking, this leads me back to the workflow idea. So here's a session, more or less. I got more stuff in it, but I was just showing only the audio files. The way I usually work is here's where I'm cutting the instances, and you have little videos up here. And then I have my library down here, and I use the locate points in Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this forever. I stack material for myself to use way down at the end of the session, down at like hour 8 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I have quick locate points to get to it. So here's my super long, stupid takes, right? Where I just couldn't control myself. Right. And then I go through and then I find the little bit that I want, and then I clip it out and I mute it. That way I know I've used it.
Oh, that's very smart.
It's it's kind of laborious, but for me, I've been doing this forever. That way, if you've got a file that's got 20 rock hits, right, and you're doing a big destruction scene, you don't want to use the same one over and over again. At least I don't. But you see how I, especially for this game stuff, I need to have a lot of material that each one of these files is related kind of genetically. Mm-hmm. So it's all the same sorts of sounds that I've made. These are all breaths. These are all rock debris, pieces, for example. But they're connected. But I find myself needing different colors, right? So I don't try to build the whole thing in radium. Because one, if it was going to be mixed by somebody else, they need to have separation of highs and lows and different qualities. Sure. Take that glassy ringing out, push up that flangey airy sound, whatever. It happens all the time on features. So whenever I'm cutting, I'm building up in layers, and it doesn't do you any good to have one sound that does everything. Mm-hmm. And especially in this kind of game thing, which again is not my forte, but I'll build it and I'm just like, I need a little something that does X, Y, Z, and then I'll make that flavor, that texture and I'll bring it in. And what I've taken to do lately is make them different colors. So then I can know, kind of like a cookbook, as I go through, here's my movement sounds. I got my main ones here, and then I added these, and these are the sandy ones, and then these here are the gritty, crunchy ones or whatever. And so I can kind of build my composites out of the layers that I need. I can change this, relative volume or speed or placement of the different things. And that's my workflow is I make source for myself and then I cut it.
Totally makes sense. When you're working on a surround feature, do you think in terms of pan location as well? So will you build like, okay, I think for the left surround, right surround, I don't want anything too percussive perhaps.
Sure.
Do you think in those terms as well? Like when you're building out your source, are you thinking about possibly what speakers you're going to be using them for?
Yeah, sure. Most of the time it's going to be in the front, but if you have like a vortexy thing, then I'll say, oh, maybe I want to have the creepy vocals in the surrounds and I want to have the whipping sand in the front or whatever, but more often what I'll probably do is make those 2 layers of the vortex, let's say, and then I'll bring them into Pro Tools and then I'll start panning them, but because they're separate, I can pan them differently, see how it sounds. I can mix them differently, add verb to each one separately or whatever.
Do you create thumper tracks, like LFE tracks at all in Radium? Is that something you bother with?
No, but I have, let me see. Oh yeah. What I did do on one of these movement things is, I had a percussive sound. I don't think I could find it at the moment, but I had a bunch of, rock type stuff happening. And then I had one track, which was a big thumpy impact. And then of course all of Radium was going into a rack that had some, saturation and limiting and stuff like that. And I had a random delay on that so that whenever it hit, it would then affect everything else because it was slamming the meters, right?
Right.
So it would give me that interesting, that would happen at different times as I played. So that, and then I think I had to limit the keyboard range on that so that I would get it when I wanted it, not with all of my layers happening.
Is that something you play around with a lot? Is the keyboard range? I know we talked about it during development of this thing. Do you end up doing it, or do you just let it rip?
Most of the time I'm letting it rip. But there are definitely times when I've got sounds that, this particular sound does not sound good down there. I only want to use it up here, or it just completely takes over what I'm building if it's down there. So I will limit the range so that I can have control over that. And it's funny, just, again, I'll never find it. Here's all my presets. But that just came up the other day while I was recalling presets, thinking, what can I show? And then I'm like, oh, how come this doesn't sound? Oh, I split the keyboard. I have to play it up and down. I had forgotten that there was a range. But it's super useful that way. Yes, I definitely did add a thumper, if you want to call it that, and then having the low end from that one element that popped in from time to time. Overdrive everything else was super, super fun, super cool.
Are there certain effects that you tend to use all the time? You got favorites or anything like that?
You mean processing?
Yeah, as far as inside Radium itself.
Oh yeah. Well, the bass enhancer all the time, but I and no one should complain that it is so powerful. It's a beautiful thing, but I always turn it down.
I've got to reset the defaults. They are crazy.
No. If you change it, then all our presets will be messed up, right?
Oh no, it won't. It'll just be the initial set.
Oh, right. So, but I just I love it because it is so powerful. I mean, it's crazy. And then the new limiter is rocking because sometimes you just want to, it's Hollywood, right? Everything's got to be bigger and louder.
And you're recording everything 24-bit or the default? You're not using 32-bit float?
No, I'm not. Because for me, I just feel like the disk space. I know everybody says drives are cheap, but they're not. Um, so,
you just keep an eye on the clipped warning and just dial it down if needed.
Oh, so here's something you want to tell people, because it wasn't entirely clear to me, but what you prior to you explaining it was that all of this stuff is summed in a kind of a 32-bit environment inside Radium, if I'm correct, and then this is like your gain reduction, like your clip gain. So this, if you're not clipping here, you're not clipping. Period.
Exactly.
Even because
if we think about
the reds here,
the old flow going into like an old channel strip on an analog board, if you clipped it on that strip, you were screwed from that point on. Whereas with digital, because it is just numbers, it's not until it does its final little output, where it's having to crash down to 24-bit. That's where the clipping actually happens. So yeah, you could take slot 1, you could crank it up 36 decibels. As long as on the output you cranked it down, it would be the exact same sound. See,
that is so awesome and powerful and good to know, because there are times when you're working in headphones and you might have this, I usually try to keep this up because I'm hoping that that's 0 and that we're kind of 0 across, but you process stuff in the rack and you get it all crunched. Then you listen back to the next day and you're like, what was I thinking? It's way too hot. So being able to trim it all back here and know that you're sending a reasonable level, because it goes from here to the rack, correct?
Correct.
Right. So if I'm hitting the rack too hard, I can just back it off here. That is also super useful.
Another fun thing that probably should mention, because this is, I think, pretty unique with samplers, is that Radium, each one of the slots is running its own native sample rate. So if you throw 192 kilohertz sound into slot 1, it's going to process at 192 kilohertz. If you put a 48K file in slot 2, it's going to process at 48 kilohertz. So crazy. That way, so that's going to become very important down the line when this becomes a plugin, because it means you could do your previewing at, say, 48K. So that way the plugins, because some of the plugins, especially like Synaptic, anything that does really heavy math, when it's trying to process at 192K, it bogs down your system. So this way you could do your previewing at 48K and you're like, yeah, it sounds really good, but I might want to pitch the sound down 3 octaves in the future. Well, then you can bounce it out at 192K native, and it'll be the entire signal flow will be exactly 192 through Radium, the original sound, through the plugins, and everything will be like wicked. And that way, you can come back afterwards and pitch it down and not lose anything.
Yeah, I mean, having mixed sample rates here, I didn't even occur to me. But yeah, the fact that you've got that working, means you're already hipper than Pro Tools, right? But as we were talking before, kind of late development, relatively speaking, because this has been so powerful to begin with. But the fact that you have this auto detect and we can do a Shift R and then bring these all in and have it randomly, now each one of these is identified separately, and as I play one key, it's going to randomly choose from all of these 40, 50 takes. That is the most powerful thing, and that has really made the work that I'm doing now so incredibly fruitful, that I can have 5 slots or 6 slots and have them all with multiple takes of multiple things, all randomizing everything, and then I can randomize the pitch, and and then I just play a few notes, and every time I perform something, I have a different sound, but it is all related genetically, so it's all from the same set. It's just making material is so easy and fun. It's incredible. It's so powerful. It just like blows my mind still.
Well, thanks.
And then you can make something. It's incredible. And all these things that I made before, I can now load them in and use them as a layer in something else if I want.
So do you find yourself on slow days going through your library where it was just individual hits and comping them together so that in the future you're like, oh, okay, I'm ready to go?
No. No, because anything that I make in a sampler, I always do a ton. I do way too many. So I got that going. But yeah, as far as source material from other people's libraries, yeah, absolutely. But again, I don't have those slow days. And if I do, I'm typing in metadata. but but yeah, earlier, I had a request for like this really random kind of sound, and I was like, what am I going to do? And so I took probably a minute's worth of 5 different categories of sounds, wood, metal, stone, bones, whatever, all this. And I had this long thing, and I did the automatic regions of it. And so then I was really getting a lot of variety, because every time I played, it might be metal, it might be glass, it might be dirt, and that was one of my layers to try to get even more randomness. So I had material that I could play with. I was just going to say, these are, again, way too many variations that I made. Fooling around with making kind of flanged electricity sweeteners. Mm-hmm. And I pulled this up. I was like, oh, this would be a fun one to show. It's got one sound in it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really? One sound.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's one that you've made, is it? Oh, no, it's a dry ice recording. What does it sound
I processed the heck out of it.
Beforehand, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly, beforehand. And then I was listening to it, and I thought, wow, something funky is happening. I have random pan, but nothing else. And then I realized, oh, I had done this.
Oh, yes.
So here's my start. So I think I had basically only 2 flavors, and I just moved the start marker. So with this, I'm going to turn this off because it's off to the side. Anyways, so it's just doing a slow pitch ramp down. And then if I hide that, and then I go back to this one, here's a different one. So it's very simple, overly flanged sort of thing, and just a pitch down. I could do that with pitch and time or verify or whatever, but this is way more fun. And then I can do a couple notes or whatever, and I've got a sci-fi explosion or energy or whatever. So this is the simplest use of radium, but again, it's giving me all this material that I would not be able to get unless I spent a whole lot more time.
Sounds fantastic.
Building it. I have made hours and hours of new material, more than I have in the last 5 years, since I had this, because it's so easy to make stuff, and it's so fun and so rewarding, and you just, here's another thing. I needed all these variations or sweeteners for this creature walking on wood, right? Mm-hmm. So they're all related. I could sweeten them, when I actually cut them in, add some other layers. But this is a primary kind of fat, crunchy, rumbly layer.
Yep.
Little creaks, And once I load it, that's probably 5 minutes, recording time and finding some sounds and putting them in there, and if I had to like build those from all sorts of random stuff, it would take forever.
Are you using the new ability to name your files ahead of time before you hit record?
Yes. And then I saw somebody talk about doing a key command. Woo,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm doing that. And then often, because they're like -1, -2, whatever. So I renamed them there. This is going to be embarrassing, but I'm just playing around. I recorded a cork out of a sadly empty liquor bottle, and for this little insect creature, what can I get? Let's see. Just fooling around. This was definitely, I had this in mind as a texture. I didn't know what I was going to get, so I was going through.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So this was creative time. It was like, what do I do? What do I get if I play around with this stuff? And it's just.
Do you use anything with the pitch bend wheel or any sort of like aftertouch modulation? Do you mess around with any of that kind of stuff on your keyboard?
Pitch bend all the time, sure. Not aftertouch.
Or any sort of like MIDI controller number, any sort of knobs or anything that you can assign?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say that I feel like as much as I'm using the hell out of it, right? But I feel like I'm probably only accessing about 20% of what it can do, because even what I use it for is exactly what I want, giving me exactly what I need, and I'm thrilled. So I don't do a lot of stuff. Sometimes I'll get a mod wheel on the chopper or the ring mod and be able to dial in a kind of performance oriented mod. Last year there was a lot of sci-fi stuff, so then I could use chopper and I could use the ring mod, and I would put in a couple of steady layers here and make a drone. And then this is the thing that I begged you for that is so incredibly awesome. Mm-hmm. This lag that smooths out the MIDI automation. So then if I'm working on, you can't see it, as I use the pitch wheel, this smooths it out. So if I have a flying drone sound, I can do pitch variations, crank this up so that it smooths them out so they're not choppy, and then it'll just be kind of gliding along, pitch wise. And then on the other side here with my other hand, I got my mouse on a GRM Doppler, and I'm performing the Dopplers, and I can go up and down. I can have it be an accel by, I can have it be a by and then accel away, mm-hmm. just by manipulating the pitch that way. So it's so expressive and so powerful.
Beautiful. That's what I love to hear. It's very inspiring, Tim. Very inspiring seeing and listening to your work.
Oh, that's too loud. Sorry. I'm glad you're inspired, but the point is you're inspiring all of us. All of us have this shiny new tool to use that, it's magic. It's right there. It's magic, and it's fun, and it's fast. And
I'll
it's just, no, don't. It's the best. I tell you, I don't know how you can be surprised when people fawn all over it, because to me, it's exactly what I wanted. It's incredible. It is my go-to tool for source creation. Even with this, like for example, let's say this is electricity, right? And it's a steady sound. But if I put in the random start, and then I have some other percussive thing on another slot, then you get the, and then you get,
right.
and
mm-hmm.
and you just add some variety with panning and random pitch, and and you can put in your pitch envelope or whatever, and all of a sudden you can sit there and just tap the key, and every time it's so yeah, all of these things, which were really secondary. Our original thing was just get me the sounds here, get me from my library to the sampler, because that was the problem with other samplers.
Yeah.
It's such a pain to get it from here in, and just being able to do that. Mm-hmm. And being able to just take any sound that you want and get that feel for what you're doing, and I want it to be higher, I want it to be lower, I want it, it's not a totally random thing like some other software where it will just randomly do stuff. Okay, so it's got a little tonal thing there, and that's what I want. I can now we got variations. Or guess what? Oh, the shot changed. Now we need a steady. Now we're riding along next to it. It's
that's so cool.
It's the simplest feature. Not using any of your whiz bang stuff, right? It's just having the sound under your fingers, and then then you got your pitch band going.
Beautiful.
It's so powerful, and having it integrated into the library means I don't have to go anywhere else. And I just record the results and drop them in, and boom, there we go.
That's brilliant. Tim,
brilliant. You are brilliant.
No, dude.
I am just a novice. I'm doing the simplest tricks over and over again and trying to imitate my my heroes. And that's it.
I love it. Like I said, very inspiring.